In a forgotten corner of the library of time, where whispers of the past share hidden secrets and the shadows of great thinkers meander through ancient texts, a radiant beacon of curiosity emerges. The Analysis of Mind by Bertrand Russell. Picture a realm where the human mind, an expansive ocean of thoughts, emotions, and perceptions, unfolds before our eager eyes. Russell, the master logician and philosopher par excellence, beckons us on a remarkable journey into the essence of our existence, challenging conventions and unraveling the intricate threads that form the fabric of our conscious experience. In this work, the author plunges into the depths of human thought with the precision of an explorer navigating uncharted territory. What is consciousness? How do emotions resonate with the rhythms of our physiology? What role do sensations play in shaping our reality? With each page, Russell encourages us not just to observe, but to engage actively in the dance of knowledge, where every idea is a step, each argument an unexpected twist, and every reflection a revelation illuminating the shadowy recesses of the psyche. Russell's prose resonates like a gentle breeze, guiding us through the labyrinths of thought and psychological theories. His metaphors sparkle like stars in the night sky, inviting us to ponder our nature and that of those around us. As he navigates the landscapes of desire, memory, and perception, he reminds us that, much like in an ancient saga, the true hero of this narrative is ourselves, thinking beings in pursuit of meaning in a chaotic universe. The Analysis of Mind transcends a mere academic discourse. It is an expedition of discovery, an invitation to question, to delve deeper, and, most importantly, to grasp the complexity of being human. Prepare to be entranced by Russell's eloquent prose, guiding you through a captivating intellectual journey where each discovery unveils a new horizon and every conclusion opens a doorway to wonder. Here, within the following pages, lies a universe of possibilities where the mind becomes a boundless expanse of exploration, waiting to be traversed by those daring enough to dream and think beyond the obvious. Embark on this profound and transformative analysis, and let Bertrand Russell's insights awaken a fresh understanding of reality, where the mind is not merely a vessel of thoughts, but the stage for an endless epic. Lecture 1. Recent Criticisms of Consciousness. So-called mental events include believing and desiring. In these lectures, we will more clearly define what mental means. I will focus on analyzing what actually happens when we believe or desire, and in this first lecture I will refute a common theory I once supported: the idea that the mental is synonymous with consciousness, viewed as a relationship to objects, like a quality of psychic phenomena. The reasons against this theory will be divided into two parts. First, direct reasons based on analysis and its difficulties. Second, indirect reasons derived from observing animals, comparative psychology, and individuals with disorders. In popular philosophy, a firm distinction is made between mind and matter, though many admit they don't really understand what mind is or how matter constitutes itself. They believe both are opposed and part of the real world. However, philosophers have debated whether matter is merely a creation of the mind, or if the mind is merely a property of matter. Idealists believe the mind is real and that matter is an illusion, while materialists think the opposite. Both groups believed they understood these terms, though I think they were mistaken. In my view, the world of our experience is composed neither of mind nor matter, but of something more fundamental, a common ancestor to both. I have already explained my reasons regarding matter. However, the question of mind is more complex and will be the main subject of these lectures. Many recent works support the need for theories like those I will advocate, and in this first lecture I will briefly outline the relevant systems of ideas for our inquiry. In common opinion, the mind is represented by consciousness. We are conscious of what we see, hear, recall, think, and feel. We believe that chairs and tables are conscious to us. When we sit on a chair, we are already aware of it, but the chair is not. This difference is obvious, but when trying to define it, doubts arise. Is consciousness simple and ultimate, or is it complex and related to our interaction with objects or the existence of ideas in us? Until we answer these questions, we cannot fully understand what it means to be conscious. Let us first consider consciousness from the perspective of traditional psychology. There are different ways of being conscious, such as perception. We perceive objects like tables, chairs, and people through our senses. Perception, according to traditional psychology, goes beyond sensation and makes us aware of objects. Another path is memory, which is a form of consciousness relating to the past. This raises problems about how we can be conscious of what no longer exists. From memory, we move to ideas in the sense of Berkeley and Hume, who opposed impressions. We can be conscious of a friend by seeing them or thinking of them, and also of non-visible objects like humanity. Moreover, beyond the forms of being conscious, there are other mental aspects like desire, pleasure, and pain, which we will address later. More complex problems arise when analyzing forms of consciousness called cognitive elements of the mind. A common element in all forms of consciousness is their direction toward objects. We are conscious of something. This relationship with an object is considered typical of cognition in traditional psychology. Some psychologists treat mental phenomena like physical phenomena without much attention to the object. Others, like Brentano, emphasize the mind's relation to the external world, highlighting knowledge as a mysterious phenomenon. Brentano, in his work Psychology from an Empirical Standpoint, 1874, asserts that all psychic phenomena intentionally include an object within themselves, distinguishing them from physical phenomena. Although I once thought like Brentano, I now believe that mental phenomena do not necessarily refer to objects. Even in the case of knowledge, I will explain this change in perspective in future lectures. Meinong, Brentano's successor, developed this theory by stating that in the thought of an object, there are three elements: the act, the content, and the object. The content is present during the thought, while the object is not necessarily present. To understand Meinong's theory of thought, consider the thought of St. Paul. According to Meinong, there are three elements in the thought: the act of thinking, the content of the thought, and the object of the thought. The act of thinking is the same, regardless of the object. The content distinguishes one thought from another, and the object is what one is thinking about. Thought occurs in the present, but the object may not be present, demonstrating the difference between content and object. Meinong maintains that there can be no thought without an object, although the object may exist without the thought. I believe this analysis is flawed. First, the three-part analysis is unnecessary. The content constitutes the thought. I find no evidence for the supposed act, which seems to be a remnant of the idea of a soul or subject. Thoughts may be grouped by person, but the person is not a component of the individual thought. The grammatical forms "I think" and "you think" are misleading. It would be better to say "thoughts about me," like "it rains here." Moreover, the relationship between content and object is not as direct as Brentano and Meinong suggest. This relationship stems from beliefs about the connection between thought and object. In imagination, we can have content without an object. In seeing or hearing, we have objects without content, as what is perceived is part of the physical world. The relationship between mental events and objects is complex and cannot be resolved by considering reference to objects as essential to thoughts. These observations will be expanded upon later. Simply put, when we think, the content of the thought is in our mind, while the object is generally external. Idealism denies the existence of the object, claiming that only thoughts are real and that everything we know is a mental construction. In contrast, realism argues that we know objects directly through sensations and potentially through memory and thought. For idealists, beliefs connected to our thoughts lead to other thoughts, not to something radically different. Realists, on the other hand, tend to dismiss content and claim that thought consists only of act and object, or only of object. Modern idealism suggests that the world is organic and can be inferred as a whole from any portion, while realists believe that we know the physical world directly. However, realism faces difficulties in explaining memory and thought without resorting to the act of remembering. William James, in his essay "Does Consciousness Exist?", argues that consciousness as an entity does not exist and is merely a function of knowledge. According to James, the raw material of the world is not composed of separate mind and matter, but these categories emerge from different patterns and relationships of interaction. James proposes that knowledge rests on relationships between fragments of pure experience. Experience does not have an internal duality of subject and object, but is divided into consciousness and content by addition. He uses the analogy of painting to explain how the same material can play different roles depending on the context. James rejects consciousness as a separate entity, viewing it as a function of knowledge, and compares thinking to the act of breathing. American realists influenced by James, such as Perry and Holt, consider that mind and matter are made of neutral substance that is neither mental nor material. Sensations are neutral and belong both to psychology and physics, while purely mental or material entities are subject to causal laws specific to their domain. Behaviorism, led by Watson and supported by Dwyer, denies introspection and focuses only on observable behavior. According to this perspective, scientific psychology can only study what can be externally observed, rejecting the idea of unobservable internal mental processes. Behaviorism relies on observing animal behavior, avoiding interference with the mind. For example, a dog is said to know its name because it responds when called, but this is only a deduction. Studies of animal behavior have shown that many actions can be explained without assuming consciousness. Behaviorists apply this approach to human behavior, claiming that one can only know what is observable from the outside. Behaviorism rejects introspection and considers that knowledge is demonstrated through behavior. Watson argues that knowledge is merely a series of observable habits without the need to assume thought or mind. Although behaviorists deny introspection, they claim that self-knowledge is no different from knowledge of others. Regarding desire, it is argued that humans act with goals and experience pleasure and pain depending on their success or failure. Unlike inanimate matter, living beings show persistence and are motivated by future goals, which distinguishes their behavior from the physical study of matter. Desire, like knowledge, is observable in a sense. We observe animals' behavior and infer their desires. However, when it comes to our own desires, we believe we know them through immediate self-awareness, which is a mistake. We discover our motivations by observing our actions and inferring the desires that motivated us. A conscious desire arises when we tell ourselves we have it, but this is fundamentally no different from an unconscious desire. Morality further complicates this subject, as we tend to judge people by their conscious motives. However, our motives may be hidden even from ourselves, leading to self-deception. Introspection is not a reliable source of knowledge about our own desires. Psychoanalysis has shed light on unconscious desires, but many psychoanalytic theories have a limited view of these desires. Unconscious desires can profoundly influence our actions and beliefs, even when we consciously reject them. This knowledge has shifted the treatment of madness toward a more psychological approach. Instead of searching for physical defects in the brain, we look for repressed desires that find expression in delusional forms. From the outset, it is crucial not to categorize modern perspectives into traditional materialism and idealism, as this distinction is inappropriate in the study of delusions. Modern theories liberate the materialist method, but idiocy and dementia should still not be considered from a physiological angle. The interaction between mind and matter has been a topic of metaphysical debate. Psychophysical parallelism posits that mental and physical events have causes within their respective realms, but this perspective lacks solid foundations and is difficult to reconcile with clear facts about the mind's influence on matter. It is a hypothesis without convincing empirical basis. There is no reason to assume that the laws governing the movements of living bodies are identical to those of inanimate matter. The study of living bodies' behavior is different from physics and must be approached independently. Freud and his successors emphasized the importance of unconscious desires but did not explain what they are. This gave their doctrine an air of mystery and mythology. The unconscious is often spoken of as if it were another consciousness hidden in a dungeon, which has comforted many calm and well-behaved individuals. An unconscious desire is merely a causal law of behavior, similar to a force in dynamics, not a mysterious phenomenon. It develops from a primitive tendency that becomes conscious through observation and theorizing. Freudian repression is not the common cause of unconscious desires. In reality, desires are often originally unconscious. This view, presented by Watson, suggests that daily habits inhibit past instincts, thus explaining censorship biologically. Removing the mystery in mental analysis demystifies psychoanalytic phenomena. From an evolutionary standpoint, animals share aspects of knowledge and desire, even without consciousness. This term will fade in the upcoming lectures, as it is mostly considered a trivial linguistic habit. It is crucial to remember that there is no significant gap in structure and behavior between proto-humans and humans, suggesting mental continuity in organic evolution. This hypothesis can be interpreted in two ways. One implies inferring similar mental processes in animals and plants based on our knowledge of our own minds, while the other suggests that human mental phenomena can be better understood by comparing them to simpler behaviors observed in animals. The crucial question is whether we know more about human or animal psychology, which depends on whether introspection or external observation is the more reliable method in psychology. While introspection gives us unique information about ourselves, for rigorous scientific analysis, extensive observation and the theories that stem from it are fundamental. Introspection can be misleading and requires verification through external observation. Overall, it is likely that we learn more about human psychology by studying animals than vice versa, though this conclusion is subject to revision. It is essential to recognize that in animals, and even among other humans, we can only directly observe bodily phenomena such as movements and physiological processes, not desires or beliefs. Therefore, in studying psychology through external observation, we must refrain from making assumptions about internal aspects and focus on what is observable, such as movements and reactions to stimuli. William James distinguishes three types of human movements: voluntary, reflexive, and mechanical. Reflexes are involuntary responses, while voluntary movements are conscious and directed actions. However, external observers cannot distinguish between voluntary and reflexive movements, as they cannot perceive the accompanying consciousness. Additionally, there is a type of mechanical movement, such as stumbling, which is more similar to the movements of inanimate matter. This distinction is important for understanding vital movements caused by the nervous system compared to mechanical movements, which are determined by general physical properties. We must be cautious in differentiating mechanical movements from vital movements. It is likely that with more knowledge of animal bodies, we could deduce their movements based on the laws of chemistry and physics. Today, it is common to see how chemistry is reduced to physics, meaning that differences between chemical elements can be explained by differences in their physical structure. The electrons that compose this structure are identical in all types of matter. Although we only partially understand how to reduce physiology, it is likely that such reduction is possible. Some analogies may help to understand the difference. A shock against dynamite produces an explosion, while a shock against steel barely causes a disturbance. In both cases, there is a store of energy ready to be released by a slight disturbance. The same applies to the human body, which contains a store of energy ready to be directed by a slight disturbance, like spoken words. In summary, vital movements are triggered by harnessing the energy stored in unstable balance, while mechanical movements do not involve this energy. Psychologists focus only on vital movements, ignoring mechanical movements. It is important to distinguish between instinctive movements and those acquired through experience. Instincts depend on prior experience and can vary during animal development. For example, the maturation of the sexual instinct is not learned, but it can change the animal's behavior in the presence of a mate. A movement can be learned or represent a habit when it results from prior experiences in similar situations, not reflecting what it would be if the animal lacked these experiences. However, the distinction between instinct and learning can be blurred due to various complications. For example, instincts can mature gradually, and initial clumsiness can be mistaken for learning. Often, instinct only provides a rough idea of what to do, requiring learning for precision. Even in acquired habits like speech, some instinct is necessary to initiate the process. Despite exceptions, the distinction between instinct and habit is clear. For example, an animal may eat by instinct at birth, while no one can learn to ride a bike by instinct. The process of learning through the acquisition of habits has been widely studied, such as in experiments with animals like cats or rats. It is observed how they learn to perform tasks to obtain food. The theory proposed by Professor Watson suggests that habits arise from random movements, where the repetition of success leads to their exclusive execution. However, this theory faces objections, such as the speed with which improvements are observed in subsequent attempts. Although there is a lack of data to fully explain the genesis of habit from random movements, the implication of consciousness does not seem necessary. Professor Thorndike formulates two provisional laws of learning: the law of effect and the law of exercise. The first states that responses followed by satisfaction tend to be strengthened, while those followed by discomfort tend to weaken. The second indicates that the strength of the connection between a situation and a response increases with the frequency and duration of the connections. The concept of satisfaction and discomfort is key to these laws. As we ascend the evolutionary scale, the capacity for learning tends to increase, while pure instinct changes in adulthood. However, instinct remains fundamental to learning, as it drives the individual's relationship with the environment. The popular conception of instinct as infallible and static is incorrect. Instinct is rudimentary and clever, capable of achieving results in common circumstances, but easily fooled by the unusual. For example, chicks may follow any moving object resembling their mother. Bergson, citing Fabre, mentions the case of the digger wasp, which lays its eggs in a caterpillar. The wasp stings exactly at each of the caterpillar's nerve centers, but without killing it immediately, before laying its eggs. Dr. and Mr. Spam refuted Fabre's claims about the wasp's sting, stating that it is not consistent nor inherent, and that sometimes the caterpillar is not paralyzed but may be killed directly. This demonstrates how a love of the marvelous can lead us to errors. Another example is the Lomechusa beetle, whose larvae are fed by ants in their nest, with the ants protecting them as carefully as their own larvae. Instinct grows wiser with experience, as illustrated by the case of hunters imitating deer sounds. It is crucial to understand some key characteristics of instinct. It functions without anticipating the biological goal, being designed only for the animal's usual circumstances. It can improve with experience and fosters impulses for learning. In its initial stage, it is modifiable. The essence of instinct lies in providing a mechanism to act without foreseeing advantage from a biological perspective. Lecture 3. Desire and Feeling. Desire is a topic that requires constant questioning of common opinions. Traditionally, it is considered an attitude directed toward an imagined goal, called the object of desire, and is thought to motivate our actions. However, psychoanalysis reveals unconscious desires that may contradict what we consciously believe we desire. This suggests that desire may be more complex than we think. The conflict between what we say we desire and our observed actions is evident in many cases. Psychoanalysis tends to value external action more than introspective testimony, suggesting that desire may be a force underlying our actions rather than a purely mental entity. The study of animals also supports this idea, as it eliminates ethical considerations and illusions of rationality, allowing us to better understand how instincts drive useful actions without the need to foresee outcomes. Therefore, analyzing desire may be clearer through the study of animals than through the observation of humans. Desire in animals manifests through observable actions, not mental states. We can infer an animal's desire by observing its behavior, such as restless movement when searching for food when hungry. These actions, such as seeking food or avoiding danger, follow a defined pattern. Activity aimed at achieving a goal that results in inactivity once the goal is reached. This cycle of actions characterizes desire in animals and is distinct from mechanical or random movements. For example, an animal that falls into a ravine does not seem to desire its fate, as its behavior is mainly mechanical and would not be repeated if it survived. Thus, desire in animals is defined by observable behavioral patterns, not by subjective states, allowing us to better understand their motivations and needs. Observing animal behavior leads us to consider that desire manifests through cycles of goal-directed actions that continue until the goal is achieved. These actions can be interrupted by various factors, but follow a defined pattern. It is this characteristic that leads us to attribute desires to animals, as their behavior resembles ours when we act out of desire. To describe animal behavior, I propose the following definitions. A behavior cycle is a sequence of movements aimed at a specific result that continues until it is achieved unless interrupted. The goal of a behavior cycle is the result that ends this cycle. We say that an animal desires to achieve the goal of its behavior cycle. However, the initial stimulus for a behavior cycle may be instinctive rather than motivated by foreseeing the goal. For example, in reproduction and caring for young, animals perform actions without consciously foreseeing the final outcome. In humans, the sensation of discomfort can trigger a behavior cycle, as in the case of hunger, where the unpleasant discomfort drives us to seek food. Our consciousness seems to be merely a spectator of the process, even when we issue commands that would have been carried out without our intervention. This perspective challenges our conventional understanding of human desire, but it makes sense when we closely examine our supposed desires and their causes. Conscious desire consists of essential elements of desire and beliefs about what we desire. It is important to distinguish that desire is not made up of beliefs. The primitive, non-cognitive component of desire seems to be an impulse that drives us toward the ideal and away from the real. We experience discomfort that triggers bodily movements to stop it, and when it ceases, we experience pleasure. Pleasurable sensations do not generate actions on their own, but stimulate actions that may prolong them. Discomfort and pleasure are closely tied to action and desire. Momentarily abandoning the behaviorist viewpoint, we can consider that hungry animals experience discomfort that drives them to seek food, and when they find it, they experience pleasure. This connection suggests that discomfort and pleasure are properties of mental events rather than separate mental events. The confusion between discomfort and pain has led to an exaggerated perception of discomfort and its significance, which in turn influences the perception of pleasure. Once we clearly distinguish between discomfort and pain, it becomes more natural to consider discomfort and pleasure as properties of experiences rather than as separate mental events. Therefore, I reject the idea that they are distinct mental events and instead view them as properties of experiences that we might call uncomfortable and pleasant, respectively. It remains to be examined whether discomfort and pleasure are real qualities of mental events or simply differences in causal properties. I find no way to resolve this question, considering both views equally valid in explaining the facts. Thus, it is safer to avoid assuming that such intrinsic qualities of mental events exist, like discomfort and pleasure, and to assume only the causal differences that are undeniable. In following this course, I will define discomfort as a characteristic of a sensation or another mental event that stimulates voluntary or reflexive movements to bring about a specific change involving the cessation of that event. On the other hand, pleasure will be defined as a property of a sensation or another mental event in which the manifestation does not prompt voluntary or reflex movements, and in doing so only stimulates those that tend to prolong the manifestation in question. The conscious desire we will consider involves desire associated with a true belief concerning its goal, that is to say, with respect to the state of things that will accompany calm once the discomfort has ceased. However, a belief related to its goal can be erroneous, as only experience can show what causes discomfort. Natural errors, which constitute a large proportion of what we call self-deception, often occur when people have little experience or suppress their impulses. These errors can give rise to a secondary desire that does not have the same power as a primary desire to produce full satisfaction when realized. Vain desires are secondary, but erroneous beliefs can prevent us from realizing what they are. Self-deception arises when we wish for things that are difficult to achieve, such as universal popularity or the perfection of the universe. To feel better, we prefer to believe that these things will happen, even though they are actually difficult to attain. This type of desire, called the desire for beliefs, is powerful both individually and socially. It can manifest as vanity, optimism, or religion, and often leads to defending these beliefs fervently, even punishing those who question them. Through the desire for beliefs, the fundamental nature of desire becomes opaque, and consciousness plays a confused and exaggerated role. In summary, any thought can trigger a series of actions aimed at achieving a stable state called a behavioral cycle. The desire that generates discomfort drives this cycle, which ends in pleasure once stability is reached. The actions within the cycle are not merely mechanical, but also involve bodily movements driven by the nervous system. Desires can be conscious when they are accompanied by true beliefs about the desired state, or unconscious when they lack this association. Primary desires are often unconscious, and erroneous beliefs give rise to secondary desires, complicating the psychology of human desire without changing its fundamental nature. Lecture 4. Influence of past history on present events in the lives of organisms. In this lecture, we address the key distinction between living organisms and inert matter. The response to stimuli depends not only on the present, but also on past history. For example, The saying, "a burned child dreads the fire," illustrates how previous experiences influence future responses, even if they leave no physical marks. This phenomenon, called mnemonic phenomena, suggests that past events affect present responses. Although this principle can be observed in inert matter, it is more frequent and significant in living organisms. According to Simon, mnemonic phenomena imply that past events are part of the causes of current responses. For example, a memory triggered by a scent involves both the present stimulus and past experiences. These phenomena manifest in various forms, such as acquired habits in animals and humans, where repetition of a stimulus leads to different responses due to past experience. This demonstrates how history influences our responses, constituting mnemonic phenomena. In nature, images, as we will see later, are crucial for thought. When we hear about something like New York, our minds create images based on past experiences and the current stimulus of words. This is important because images play a key role in thought, as we will see later. When we experience something familiar, it usually evokes the context of that prior experience, like the smell of smoke, reminding us of past scenes. This is a mnemonic phenomenon. There are also physical associations similar to physical habits, like those taught to soldiers during training. When we perceive familiar objects, much of what seems immediate comes from past experiences. For example, we see a penny and remember its actual shape. Perception is completed by sensations like touch. In general, objects have qualities added by perception based on experience. Memory is the knowledge of past events evoked by present stimuli and past events. It is a mnemonic phenomenon, according to our definition, which must include memory as an essential feature of psychology. The word experience is used broadly and sometimes loosely. James uses it to cover all the primordial material of the world, which is debatable, as in a purely physical world, things would happen without the need for experience. Only mnemonic phenomena represent experience. An animal experiences an event when it modifies its future behavior, that is, when it is the mnemonic cause of later events in its life. Richard Simon is a prominent writer on mnemonic phenomena. According to his theory, when an organism is excited, it undergoes a change in equilibrium, creating an engram effect. Stimuli that occur simultaneously become associated, and these engrams can be hereditary. According to Simon, two mnemonic principles explain how stimuli provoke reactions and how past experiences influence future reactions: the principle of the engram and the law of euphoria. The nature of engrams remains uncertain, but they are thought to be material changes in the organism's body. However, their introduction may not simplify the explanation of mnemonic phenomena in the current state of physiology. For now, we can understand mnemonic causality as one in which the immediate cause is not only a present event, but also a past event. This allows us to state the laws of behavior less hypothetically. The memory of past events is a clear example of the influence of the past on our present actions. Memories arise occasionally, but seem to be latent when we do not recall them. The difference between someone who can remember an event and someone who cannot probably lies in the brain, though its nature remains unknown and only hypothetical. The fundamental law of mnemonic phenomena states that if a complex stimulus has triggered a complex reaction in an organism, the partial reappearance of this stimulus tends to provoke the entire reaction. This applies to all cases where past experience influences our behavior. Mnemonic causality, based on past experience, is essential in psychology. Psychology must be independent of physiology, and if physiology can be reduced to physics, then mnemonic causality must be recognized in psychology. Rejecting the parallelism between the physical and the psychic would allow us to achieve more independence for psychology, thus accepting mnemonic causality as a fundamental principle. Bergson denied the existence of any causality in the psychic realm, mainly because the same repeated stimulus does not always produce the same consequences. However, this apparent inconsistency can be resolved by considering past events as part of the cause. Our metaphysical conception of causality persists in our idea of causal laws, as we wish to feel a connection between cause and effect. Mnemonic causality, which is based on past experience, is essential in both physiology and psychology. If we accept its influence in non-psychological fields, then the distinction between psychology and physics is called into question. The issue of brain lesions with memory loss suggests that the brain plays a crucial role in the generation of memory, but this does not prove that it is sufficient in this regard. To conclusively assert that mnemonic phenomena arise from physiological conditions, we must be able to observe real differences between the brains of individuals with different experiences and knowledge. So far, there is no conclusive evidence that all differences in knowledge between individuals are directly linked to observable brain differences. Therefore, although mnemonic causality may seem less likely compared to physiological explanations, we should not dismiss them entirely, as it remains a possibility that could explain mnemonic phenomena. It is important to keep in mind these previously improbable hypotheses, as they are often crucial for scientific progress. Lecture 5. Psychological and Physical Causal Laws. The traditional concept of cause and effect, where a specific event necessarily causes event B, does not align with modern scientific observation. Instead, science relies on laws of change, recognizing that events are continuous processes over time. For example, in an event such as death by arsenic poisoning, the poisoning process is not the immediate cause of death, but rather triggers a series of physiological changes that eventually lead to the outcome. Differential equations describe how variables change over time and are fundamental in formulating causal laws in modern science. These laws do not merely predict the occurrence of one event after another, but specify how variables change at each moment. Scientific laws are based on empirical generalizations, such as the idea that arsenic consumption generally leads to death, which reflect patterns observed in nature. In summary, modern science approaches causality by acknowledging the complexity of natural processes and using laws of change instead of simple causal sequences. The traditional notion of a single necessary cause does not hold in modern science. Instead, we recognize multiple, nearly invariable antecedents that could be considered causes. For example, several car horns honking at the same time might be seen as the cause of workers going out for lunch. Moreover, rather than seeking a single true cause for a phenomenon, we consider the different perspectives and sensations of observers to construct a fair representation of the phenomenon. This applies to physical objects like tables, where different perceptual aspects are grouped according to their similarity and relationship to the laws of perspective and light. In summary, the idea of unique causality and the existence of independent entities must be questioned, as reality is constructed from multiple variables and perspectives. To illustrate the lack of necessity in referring to our perceptions, consider stellar photography. The photographed star produces an effect on the plate, suggesting that something related to this star is occurring. This implies a multitude of events at each location connected to physical objects. These events can be grouped according to their location, or according to the appearances of a physical object at different places. A physical object is the set of all correlated particulars that would normally be considered its effects in different locations. This is crucial in distinguishing between psychology and physics, as events can be classified by their location or by the system of correlated particulars that define a physical object. When we observe changes in an object at a specific location, there are two possibilities: changes limited to certain appearances of the object or changes in all connected appearances. In the first case, the change is attributed to the medium between the object and the observer. In the second, to the object itself. Physics deals primarily with changes where all appearances change simultaneously due to simple laws. When changes in appearance are minimal in places near the object, they are explained by changes in the objects between the object and the affected places. However, when the unity of the system of appearances is broken, the explanation cannot be limited to matter. This is where psychology comes into play. Perceptions are the appearances of objects in places where sensory organs are part of the medium. Psychology focuses on these perceptions as a set of correlated particulars, while physics constructs physical objects as sets of appearances from different places. Classification by perspectives is essential for psychology, defining what we mean. First of all, I would like to clarify that my definition of perceptions is neither the only one nor the best, but it is the one that has naturally emerged in our current discussion. When exploring psychology from an introspective perspective, we must differentiate between sensations and perceptions and consider their psychological effects in contrast with their physical causes. These issues differ from those we have addressed so far and will be treated later. Psychology focuses on individual cases, unlike physics, which deals with systems in a unitary manner. Physics seeks laws by considering these systems as causal units, while psychology is interested in the particulars themselves. This distinction is fundamental and has been my primary focus in this lecture. To better define a piece of matter, consider how its appearances change from different points of view. These changes obey intrinsic laws and the nature of the medium. As we get closer to the object, the effect of the medium decreases, which we call the laws of perspective. We can construct a hypothetical system of appearances that would approximate the object without the distortions of the medium. This limit set of appearances defines the piece of matter in question according to physics. Lecture. Introspection in these lectures challenges the idea of my separation between mind and matter. In the previous one, I emphasized that what we perceive as material objects are systems similar to sensations, including actual sensations. I also argued that the material of our mental life is not devoid of qualities that allow it to be part of the material world. Orthodox psychology distinguishes between knowledge through external sensation and introspection, which provides data on mental processes. However, this distinction may be less clear than it seems. I consider the material of our mental life to consist of sensations and images connected differently to reality. While sensations can provide knowledge of the external world, images do not always do so reliably, except in cases of hallucination. Therefore, introspection as a distinct form of knowledge may not be necessary. American psychologists have criticized introspection. The article, The Case Against Introspection by Nick Dunlap, offers strong arguments against this practice, challenging the claims of its defenders like Stout and James. In summary, Dunlap argues that psychic states do not become objects solely through introspection, and that changes in our consciousness must be distinct from the conscious experience we think about. I will interrupt the narrative of Nick Dunlap's article to comment on some quotes from Stout. I will address a deeper analysis of mental states and the notion of objects, which I find problematic, in future lectures. Regarding the term consciousness, there are confusions to clarify. Conscious experience can be interpreted in two ways, as the experience of something and as an experience with a particular intrinsic nature. However, I think this distinction implies a certain separation. Dunlap criticizes Stout for introducing the concept of a single observer, which I have already dismissed. However, it is possible to believe in introspection without positing a single observer. William James's theory of introspection considers the subject and the object as the same thing at different moments. James proposes a realm of existence that includes states of consciousness or pure experience. This theory acknowledges that things are known and that the one who knows them is oneself. I question Dunlap's claim about James because it seems to concede more than what was expressed. I disagree with the idea that the knower of the elements is one and the same, something that could only be validated by introspection, which Dunlap rejects. He supports a dualism between subject and object, arguing that there is never consciousness of consciousness. Dunlap says that introspection does not reveal the process of knowing, only what is known, asserting that we are never aware of our own awareness. While this is not conclusive, since there could be valid ways to infer our consciousness that Dunlap does not consider, he suggests that introspection is simply the awareness of images and sensations, which I find reasonable. However, I do not fully agree with his conclusion about the impossibility of introspection, as there are instances when we are aware of moments of knowledge. By being conscious of these components, introspection has been challenged by behaviorists, who even deny the existence of images. But this requires clarification before discerning what is true or false in introspection. Now, we differentiate three questions about the validity of introspection as a source of knowledge. 1. Can we observe something about ourselves that others can also observe? 2. Does everything we observe follow physical laws, or are there aspects beyond the physical? 3. Can we observe something with a nature intrinsically different from the physical, or is everything observed made up of elements similar to matter? Regarding the privacy versus publicity of what is observed, I support introspection, as some of our observations are exclusive and cannot be replicated by others. As for whether everything observable follows physical laws, I think that introspective images, like visual ones, do not fully conform to these laws, which raises objections. However, concerning the third question, I deny that what is observable is intrinsically different from matter. Everything we observe consists of sensations and images, which are not inherently different from matter. These points are crucial to defining introspection and evaluating its validity as a source of knowledge. Regarding the possibility of observing something intrinsically distinct from sensations, I argue that the fundamental elements of matter are neither atoms nor electrons, but sensations and similar things, thus reducing introspective data to concrete images. From this perspective, I reject introspection. I then analyze the reliability of introspection, rejecting the idea that knowledge of our mental processes is more reliable than knowledge of the external world. Introspection is apparently no more reliable than external perception and can be equally fallible. Finally, I consider whether introspection provides us with data about relationships distinct from those we obtain through external perception. This depends on whether knowledge is an unanalyzable relationship, which remains unanswered until it is properly decomposed. Lecture 7. The Definition of Perception. In Lesson 5, we explored how the final components of the world do not simply fit into the traditional categories of mind or matter. We divided particulars into two groups, things or pieces of matter and series of perspectives, each like a biography. These perspectives are defined by the laws of dynamics and perspective, grouping sets of particulars. Momentary things, defined by sets of particulars, raise problems related to time and relativity. We can classify particulars in two ways, by grouping all simultaneous aspects and then forming series, or by grouping successive aspects for each observer and then forming sets of series. This second method is crucial for psychology, as well as for defining experiences, biographies, and persons. The connection between these two aspects relies on their spatial relationship. Although defining exactly what constitutes the same place poses challenges that require further exploration, when we see one person and hear another simultaneously, we establish a relationship between what we see and what we hear, creating a joint experience. This connection can be simply described as simultaneity. Although it seems that many things happen at the same time, this relationship is not limited to simultaneity, but also relates to each individual's local perspective. Thus, when I hear a sound, only things within my private world, my biography, occur at the same time. The perspective of a sensation includes all things simultaneous to it, while the associated biography encompasses what precedes, follows, and is simultaneous with it. These definitions also apply to particulars that are not sensations and are essential to the theory of relativity. The temporal relationships between distinct biographies are of a different kind and are essentially logical. The mnemonic phenomena present in living beings transform simple events into experiences, giving continuity to the life of a person or a mind. This dualism between body and biography applies to the entire universe, not just living beings, as every significant particular is associated with two places, the location of the physical object and the location of the observer. Thus, within the framework of physics, we can group all active details in a specific place and all passive details in another place. In our case, one of these groups is our body or brain, while the other is our mind. When we talk about perceptions, the same applies to a photographic plate. The first group is the plate itself, according to physics, and the second is the representation of the skies that it captures. Thus, subjectivity is not exclusive to the mind, as it is also present in the photographic plate. The plate also has its biography, but this falls within the domain of physics and lacks mental characteristics, except for subjectivity. From a physical standpoint, we can define a perception as the appearance of an object from a place with a brain or a nervous system and sensory organs that are part of the mind. This appearance is distinguished by its ability to generate mnemonic phenomena and be affected by them. These two characteristics, related to memory, differentiate perceptions from the simple appearances of objects where there is no life. When we perceive an object, we can theoretically separate the part that emerges from past experience from the part that does not, describing the former as sensation and the latter as perception. However, this distinction presents practical difficulties. Moreover, everything outside our biography must be considered hypothetical, as there is no solid proof of its existence. Finally, we must consider sensations as only arising from external stimuli, as our understanding of physical objects suggests a reinterpretation. When the light from a star reaches a place, we only know what it looks like if there is a brain connected to an eye. In other cases, we do not know what it truly looks like. We can compare the various appearances of the star to the conjugations of a Greek verb. Although this is infinite, the star in the void can be defined by all the appearances it presents, and those it would show elsewhere if they were regular. When the star's light reaches our atmosphere, it refracts, dims, and finally arrives at the human eye, where it is processed into a sensation. The irregular appearances of the star are not part of the star's system, but come from laws related to the intervening medium. These appearances can be confusing, especially when the medium significantly distorts the light. The distinction between mental events with an external stimulus and those internally excited is important. If a mental event is linked to objects outside the brain, it is called perception. Otherwise, it is not. This distinction is one of degree, not class, and is crucial for a satisfactory theory of perception, sensation, and imagination. Lecture 8, Sensations and Images, Mind-Body Dualism. If we have understood so far, this does not seem metaphysically valid. However, there is a dualism in our world, not so much in matter as in causal laws. William James points out that when we imagine things, they do not produce the effects they would if they were real. For example, imagine a fire that neither heats nor burns. This suggests that there are differences between the causal laws of mental and physical phenomena. If we could clearly distinguish these laws, we could label events as physical when they follow physical laws and mental when they follow mental laws. However, this distinction is not yet clear. We may encounter difficulties in defining which elements of our experience are sensations and which are not. Often, what we perceive is influenced by our interpretation and habitual correlation of experiences. For instance, when we go to the theatre in our own country, it seems that we hear well from anywhere. But in a foreign country where we don't understand the language well, we need to be closer to the stage. This is because in our language we quickly deduce what is being said, whereas in another language we rely more on the actual sensation. Similarly, in an unfamiliar world, many of our perceptions would be guesses. To truly understand the sensation in an event that seems to contain nothing else, we must eliminate everything due to habit, expectation, or interpretation. While it may be difficult to clearly determine the core of sensation in a specific experience, it is evident that it exists, as the diversity of our experiences is due to differences in what is presented by the senses. For example, when we open the newspaper in the morning, the sensations of seeing the printed letters constitute the starting point of our interaction with the information or misinformation it contains. Sensations are the source of our knowledge of the world, including our own body. However, pure sensation cannot be considered knowledge in itself. If we see a spot of color, the spot itself is physical, while the visual experience can be considered psychic. But by eliminating the distinction between the physical and the psychic, sensation and meaning become identical. American realists like William James and Professor Dwyer agree that perceptions are not cases of knowledge in themselves, but are merely natural events. The matter of the world consists of countless transient particulars, like sensory experiences, which provide the data for our knowledge of the physical world and our own body. Sensations are common to both the mental and physical worlds and can be defined as the intersection of mind and matter. Images, on the other hand, are harder to define and distinguish from sensations. It is not always clear whether what we experience is a sensation or an image, and there are several criteria to differentiate them. Hume proposed that impressions are more vivid and intense perceptions, while ideas are weaker images. However, this criterion is not always adequate, as the difference between sensations and images is not always one of degree, and there can be exceptions. I believe the most applicable criterion for distinguishing sensations from images is the third. Their causes and effects are different. Although the difference between sensations and images is not always obvious, classifying them under different titles with specific names provides a marker that can be applied even in extreme cases. Professor Stout, in his psychology textbook, presents a modification of Hume's distinction between sensations and images. He suggests that the essential difference lies in the quality of the experience. Sensations have a strength or vividness not present in images. However, this distinction fails in cases where images can be just as intense, such as in dreams or feverish delirium. Another attempt to differentiate is based on the belief in the physical reality of sensations, as opposed to the unreality of images. However, this distinction is also problematic because images can be perceived as real, especially in the case of dreams. Finally, it is suggested that the best way to distinguish images from sensations is by their causes and effects. Sensations are caused by external stimuli acting on the nervous system, while images are the product of internal associations in the brain, without the need for external stimuli. The distinction by causality seems to be the most reliable since images can result from habit and past experience, while sensations are more directly related to external stimuli. The effective distinction between sensations and images lies in their cause and effect relationship. Sensations play an essential role in stimulating the nerves that send signals to the brain, whereas images lack this direct connection to external stimuli. Moreover, sensations have both physical and mental effects, such as the physical and emotional reaction to the sight of a train leaving the station. In contrast, images, although they can provoke bodily movements, do so according to mnemonic laws, not physical laws. Professor Watson, influenced by his behaviorist theory, denies the existence of images as observable phenomena, arguing that they are replaced by weak sensations or muscular movements. However, this denial contradicts observable evidence and common human experience. Images can be of various types, reflecting the nature of the sensations they imitate. For example, images of bodily movements could be explained as small incipient movements that may become the imagined movements. However, the nature of visual and auditory images is more complex, as they have no direct connection to physical events in the external world. Professor Watson's view, suggesting that all thought develops in terms of sensorimotor processes in the larynx, seems contradictory to the common experience of people. The ability to invoke visual and auditory images is a skill many possess and cannot easily be denied. The existence of images is acknowledged by most, though their study may prove complicated due to their intrinsic nature and lack of direct connection to external stimuli. However, their scientific study is feasible and necessary for a better understanding of the workings of the human mind. Images tend to resemble earlier sensations, which allows us to call them images of something in particular. This similarity to previous sensations is crucial for understanding, memory, and knowledge in general. While there are doubts about the principles established by Hume, it is clear that simple images are often reproductions of similar simple sensations previously experienced. This characteristic is fundamental to our ability to act in relation to what is absent but present in the mind. Although the distinction between images and sensations may be subject to debate, it is clear that images, particularly auditory and visual ones, differ from ordinary sensations and form a recognizable class of mental experiences. This distinction is essential for their future study and understanding. Lecture 9. Memory. The analysis of knowledge, especially in relation to memory, introduces us to one of the most complex areas of psychology. While behaviorists base their study on purely external observation, this approach may be insufficient to fully understand knowledge, including memory. Perception, defined as the integral experience of things in the environment, differs from sensation in that it involves expectations and includes images and anticipations of habitual correlates. Past experience is important for producing sensation, but the accumulation of this experience is not necessary for perception. Memory presents many difficult problems, particularly regarding the relationship between present images and past sensations. The theory of memory is crucial for understanding how present images relate to past sensations and how they compare to each other. Memories, beliefs that make up a large part of our present experience, are not necessarily linked to events that actually occurred in the past. It is possible to conceive of a world that began only a few minutes ago, with a population that remembers an unreal past. Although this idea is a skeptical premise, it helps us understand the nature of memory and knowledge of the past. The analysis of memory leads us to understand that images alone are not enough to construct memory. Adequate beliefs are also necessary. Habits, although important, are not enough to fully explain memory. In fact, Behaviorists who study behavior rely on their own memory to record and analyze that behavior, highlighting the importance of memory in psychology. The problem lies in how we can know whether a memory image is an imperfect copy of a past event without having a more precise copy to replace it. To distinguish between reliable and less reliable memory images, we must consider two main characteristics of images: familiarity and the feeling of the past. Familiarity with a memory image gives us a sense of confidence in its accuracy, even if the image is exceptionally clear but distorted. This familiarity is a feeling that varies in degrees and allows us to discern between images we trust and those we don't. The second characteristic is the sensation of the past, which allows us to mentally situate the recalled event at a specific moment in the past. This sensation relies on the context of the memory, whether it is the sequential order of the images or the general understanding of a simultaneous process. Additionally, knowledge of the temporal relationship between a recalled event and the present often stems from its temporal relationship with other recalled events. Sensations play a crucial role in this process of dating recalled events. The analysis of memory confronts the difficulty of ensuring the truthfulness of the recalled past and its connection with the present. If we consider the subject within knowledge, the process of remembering seems simpler, but by setting it aside, it becomes necessary to formulate a more elaborate theory. Some fundamental points are clear. There is knowledge of the past. We are more capable of knowing the past than the future, and the truth of memory is not limited to practical considerations. The distinction between memory and habit, and how Bergson's independent memory underscores the complexity of the phenomenon. Although it may be difficult to differentiate these forms in practice, both require and play distinct roles. It is essential to analyze cases of memory to better understand its nature and function. For example, remembering trivial details raises questions about the influence of habit on memory. We will focus on memory as a form of knowledge, distinguishing it from simple acquired habit. Reciting a poem or animal behavior does not demonstrate knowledge of the past, but rather habits. The feeling of familiarity, though common, does not guarantee recognition of the past. This feeling can be vague or without a defined object. Recognition involves identifying something as this or that based on its association with past experiences. However, this initial recognition does not imply a real recognition of the past. Only when we recognize something and know that we have seen it before does a deeper knowledge emerge, even without recalling a specific event. This second type of recognition involves a cognitive judgment suggesting the past existence of the object. This preliminary analysis of familiarity and recognition lays the foundation for understanding memory as true and differentiating it from habit. Recognition can be better understood as, "I have seen this before," rather than "this has existed before." This recognition is based on familiarity with something similar to past experiences. Although each instance can be differentiated, when we recognize something, we do not claim it is identical to what preceded it, but rather similar in relevant aspects. Recognition arises from the perceived difference between a repeated stimulus and a new one, challenging the idea that it is merely repeated behavior. True memory involves recognizing past events, similar to the feeling of immediacy and not inference. Memory raises two problems: what happens in the present when remembering, and how does this present event relate to the recalled past? The complexity of recognition suggests that causal laws in psychology differ from those in physics, and memory resembles sensory knowledge in its immediacy and relationship with the past. The question of what happens in the present when remembering is of psychological interest, while the relationship between this present event and the recalled past belongs to the theory of recognition. Immediate memory, a bridge between sensation and image, allows us to retain the immediate past in an intermediate condition. This memory is essential for experiencing succession and reducing the distance between sensations and images. On the other hand, true memory involves belief in past events, expressed through images or words that evoke a sense of certainty. The distinction between memory images and imagination is based on this sense of belief. Furthermore, there are three types of belief: memory, expectation, and pure assent, with belief being the distinctive element of memory. Memory is characterized by certainty of the past, regardless of the specific content of what is believed. If memory can be explained as a habit or association, we must consider the causes that make us remember something. For example, If we are asked what we had for breakfast, the question itself prompts us to remember. Understanding the words involved in the question is also a habit, but not one tied to a fixed object, rather to something having a fixed temporal relation with our present. This evaluation of time intervals is a product of memory. An illustrative example is entering a room where something has changed, like a new painting on the wall. Our sensation that something is unfamiliar prompts us to remember and say that the painting wasn't there before. This process involves associating the present image with a past sensation and comparing it to the current sensation. Association explains why the present feature of the environment brings forth the memory image, but not the belief in the memory. The relationship between belief and memory is crucial. The belief memory gives the memory image meaning by referring to an object that existed in the past. Often primitive memory judges that this happened, when in reality, it is a present image. This vague but not false judgment is based on a loose identity between the image and its prototype, which can lead to physiological confusions. Precision is vital in analyzing memory, as a lack of clarity can lead to errors in understanding ordinary memory. Understanding vagueness and precision is essential, with each having distinct levels. Thoughts are often somewhat vague, and total precision is difficult to achieve. For example, a clinical thermometer is precise in detecting minute temperature variations in the blood. In the realm of thought and perception, precision depends on responses to similar stimuli. A musician may notice subtle differences in performance, while others might overlook them. Linguistic fluency also improves with practice. For instance, French speakers can distinguish sounds that others cannot. A memory is vague when it could apply to several events, but it is precise when it specifically relates to one. It is crucial to differentiate between accuracy and vagueness. Vague beliefs are more likely to be true, although less certain. The word "this" in memory is vague and can refer to both the present image and the past prototype. Vague words depend as much on the individual's perception, while general words do not. Compared to general words, vague ones are like gelatin, while general ones are like marbles. We still need to explore the phenomenon of memory and belief. When saying "this happened" in memory, we face the ambiguity of the word "this." We must also understand what we mean by "happened." The images in memory are not events that happen, but representations of past events. What we consider real is tied to specific contexts and connections with physical sensations. The answer to the question of what we feel when saying "this" in memory is different. Our feelings of reality are linked to expectations and emotions. This sense of reality is inherent to the act of remembering. Lecture 10. Words and Meanings. The concept of meaning refers to the relationship between a word and what it represents. A word is not unique, but repeats on different occasions when spoken. The word has two aspects, that of the speaker and that of the listener. The relationship between what is said and what is heard is causal. The meaning of a word distinguishes its use from other similar movements. This meaning is not entirely conventional. It is acquired through historical and cultural processes, not by explicit agreement. Besides speech and writing, other forms like gestures convey meaning. The essence of language lies in the fixed associations between what is communicated and what is evoked. Understanding what a word is physically and what it can mean helps us grasp its relationship, its meaning. Words can be classified by grammar and parts of speech, but not all languages follow the same grammatical rules. We must avoid overvaluing the peculiarities of our languages. The nature of meaning does not depend solely on grammatical structure, but on how it relates to what it represents. Therefore, when exploring meaning, we must consider both linguistic diversity and the fundamental connections between words and their reference. When we think about the meaning of words, it's common to start with proper names like Napoleon. Using a proper name refers to a specific entity, but a person is not simply Napoleon. They consist of a succession of appearances that gradually change, forming a sequence of events interconnected by causal laws, not by similarity, as in the case of a word. The grouped events form what we call a person, an animal, or a thing. In language, there is no direct way to refer to the ultimate indivisible components of the world. For instance, although particulars may have proper names, in practice, they remain unnamed in real life. We focus more on complete systems than on individual particulars. That's why we use proper names to refer to sets of particulars, transitioning from proper names to common nouns like man or cat. A word like man represents a class of sets of particulars with similarities. There are words like eat, walk, or talk, which signify a series of similar events. The difference between words like rain or lightning and general words like man lies in the complexity of the events they represent. While a word can include simple and brief events, others, like the life of a man, are more complex and require reconstruction. Words that describe static qualities like white or round are similar to those that express processes. However, the latter involve changes, while the former are physical characteristics of the world. Words that express relationships like in, on, or before are fundamental from a logical point of view, with abstract and simple meanings. To understand a word, a person must be in situations that require it and react appropriately upon hearing it, whether actively or passively. The meaning of a word can have a certain vagueness, and it is used correctly when it influences the listener as intended. The relationship between a word and its meaning follows a causal law, determining our usage and reactions when hearing it. It is not necessary for someone who uses a word correctly to know its meaning to show that we understand what we mean by understanding words. Let's consider some examples. When warning a distracted friend, "Watch out, an engine is coming," they react without needing intermediate ideas, which can be explained by physiological laws. If you say it to someone who doesn't speak Spanish, they might have an internal reaction before acting similarly. And if you say it to a child who doesn't know the word engine, they will need a visual explanation to understand. Let's review the 4 ways to understand words. A person uses a word correctly on appropriate occasions. They act appropriately upon hearing the word. They associate the word with another that has a similar effect on their behavior, such as in another language. They associate the word with an object that represents what it means, either physically or mentally. When a word is associated with an object, part of its causal effect is shared with that object. For example, the word engine might make you startle if the engine is present, but it can't physically hurt you. This type of word effect is related to mnemonic phenomena. So far, all the forms of word usage we've discussed can be explained behaviorally. The demonstrative use of language, such as pointing to something in the present environment, is just one of its functions. Words are also used narratively and imaginatively, as in stories and novels. When it comes to recounting a past event, understanding words is straightforward. When used demonstratively, it relies on mental images and memories. In addition to the 4 forms mentioned, let us add 2 more: memory and imagination. Words can evoke images of memories or create imaginary images. To understand the role of words in thought, we must consider both their causes and effects. The causes for the emergence of words differ when the designated object is present or absent. The use of words in narration and desire has been overlooked in some behavioral theories. The word box, when mentioned without the physical presence of a box, may result from an associated mental image. This could lead us to wonder what causes the image. We might think that the desire for the box is the cause, but that would lead us to an abstraction of desire. To explain why the word or image arises in the absence of the box, we might suppose that something in the context or in our sensations has frequently occurred with the word box in the past. This relies on the law of habit and association. When we understand a word, there is a connection between that word and the images it represents. Images can evoke words and vice versa. In understanding a language, images are often significant. We can say that, like words, images have meaning. However, images tend to be more primitive in their representation than words. It is difficult to define the exact meaning of an image, as it is rarely reproduced exactly. There is another way to understand the meaning of images through their causal effectiveness. An image of an object like St. Paul may have effects similar to those of the object itself, especially those related to association. Emotional effects are also often similar. Images can stimulate desire as much as the objects they represent, and vice versa. Thus, the causal laws affecting images are linked to those of the objects they represent. An image can function with a general idea. For example, the vague image of a dog has effects related to dogs in general, not to specific characteristics. The meaning of an image is determined by its resemblance to prototypes and its causal effectiveness. If an image derives from multiple prototypes, it will be vague, and its associations will determine its meaning. The combination of resemblances and associations defines the meaning of an image. This analysis is not clear-cut, and it may be difficult to determine the exact meaning of an image. In mnemonic causation, an image or a word can have effects similar to those of an object, meaning that it represents that object. If the mnemonic effects are shared by objects of a particular type, the meaning of the image or word is general. The generality and particularity of meaning depend on mnemonic effects. Very general words may lack concrete meaning and rely on verbal associations to have practical significance. The meaning of a word is primarily constructed through mnemonic causal laws rather than by resemblance. While the meaning of a word is easier to grasp than that of an image, the underlying relationship is similar. Words have associations with images that represent their meaning, but this is not essential for their intelligent use. The power of words to foster thought is invaluable. They are easier to produce than images and allow for thinking about abstractions in a concrete and sensible manner. Moreover, two examples of the same word are more similar to each other than two different images, making it easier to think in general categories. Words also help in remembering and thinking about sets of objects with common properties. However, it is important not to rely exclusively on words in philosophical thought, as they can limit direct understanding of facts. Often philosophical advances come from direct contemplation of facts, but these ideas must be expressed in words to be communicated. Lecture 11. Ideas and Thought. The intelligent use of abstract words does not necessarily indicate a more solid, abstract mental content than other automatic actions. Language allows for associating different instances of a universal concept with a word, even if the instances are very different from each other. Berkeley and Hume questioned the existence of abstract ideas, comparing them to images. Berkeley noted that he could not conceive of abstract ideas as a movement without a moving body, without specifying its characteristics. He acknowledged the ability to abstract certain particular qualities, but denied the possibility of separating them from others that cannot exist on their own. He argued that most people cannot form abstract concepts, and that if they do exist, they are limited to scholars. This view challenges the notion that the intelligent use of language necessarily involves an understanding of abstract concepts, suggesting that words can be used automatically without implying deep understanding. The author defends the doctrine of abstraction supported by a distinguished philosopher who asserts that the capacity to have general abstract ideas marks the difference between humans and animals. However, he questions the premise that the use of language implies the possession of general ideas. He suggests that words become general by presenting multiple particular ideas, not necessarily abstract general ideas. He uses examples to illustrate that words and ideas generalize by representing multiple particular instances of the same type. For example, a particular line represents all straight lines, and the name line distinctly represents all particular lines. While Berkeley and Hume argue that abstract ideas do not exist, the author acknowledges the generalization of ideas and words, although he maintains that they are not necessarily abstract. This approach departs from the perspective of advocates of abstract ideas, and while it does not completely align with modern psychology, it provides a more flexible view of generalization in human thought. In his work, Simon discusses how sudden stimuli affect our mental images. At first we see concrete images, but over time they generalize. He uses the metaphor of superimposed photographs to explain this process called anemic homophony. This phenomenon creates abstract images representing individuals in general, such as the white or black man. He suggests that this process of physiological abstraction is a precursor to logical abstraction and is not limited to humans, but is also found in higher animals. This reveals how mental images become more abstract from concrete experiences. It is essential to differentiate between the vague and the general. The composite image proposed by Simone can be vague if it is not accompanied by particular images. For example, recalling a friend in specific situations clarifies the generalized image. Another distinction between the vague, the particular, and the general rests on the reaction provoked by the words. A word is vague when it applies to several individuals in a similar manner, like Smith. In contrast, a word is general when it differentiates itself from specific individuals, such as man. It is important to recognize that our mental images, even of specific events, always have a certain degree of vagueness. This means that an event may have varied within certain limits without our image changing noticeably. To arrive at a general understanding, we must contrast it with relatively precise images or words related to specific events. Without this contrast, we cannot achieve the clarity that defines the general. An opinion I mentioned earlier, supported by Rivet, asserts that intelligence progresses from the indefinite to the definite, and that the vague precedes the particular or the general. This is related to my argument that a general idea is distinguished from a vague idea by the presence of a judgment. In the field of the psychology of thought, numerous experimental works have been conducted. However, I question the validity of these methods, which largely rely on introspection. Introspection, while useful in some aspects, is highly subjective and susceptible to distortions based on preconceived theories. For example, in Buller's work on thought, it is claimed that thought requires neither language nor sensory presentations. However, these conclusions rely solely on introspective testimony, raising doubts about their reliability. It is possible that mental processes in which habit has eliminated the need for words may not be evident in introspection. In summary, the author questions the idea of thought detached from words and images, suggesting that the omission of these may be due more to habit than to an independent mental process. He addresses the controversy over thought without images and highlights how Thorndike found that sensory associations with bodily movements are more direct than with ideas. This suggests that many daily actions, such as eating or dressing, are performed without requiring conscious thought. The author also discusses our understanding of universals, refuting the idea that we directly perceive concepts like cat or bear smell. Instead, he suggests that awareness of universals emerges from reflexive judgments based on observing similarities and differences among different instances. He argues that universals are inferred and do not present themselves directly to the mind, forming part of the structure of the world rather than our immediate data. In summary, our internal experience consists of various factors, some observable externally and others only accessible through introspection. In summary, the author argues that observable habits and verbal reactions are fundamental to the knowledge of universals, as illustrated by the example of the horse and the person reacting to the bear's smell. However, he asserts that there is a deeper level of understanding that involves recognizing similarities and differences between instances of the same universal, a knowledge that is never immediate. Furthermore, the author highlights the existence of generic images, formed by overlaying similar perceptions that become clearer when their multiple prototypes are consciously recognized and contrasted with more specific images. He argues that ultimately, images are not necessary to explain observed behavior, including intelligent speech. The author discusses behaviorist philosophy and psychology, which minimizes the role of mental images and dismisses them as private introspective evidence. However, he argues that this perspective neglects subjectivity in the physical world, leading to the need to consider private observations to understand psychological phenomena in relation to the physical world. Lecture 12, Belief. The analysis of the mind and beliefs is essential for understanding how we think. Believing is a mental activity that leads us to form beliefs. Our intellectual life revolves around these beliefs, and we explore them through reasoning. These beliefs can be true or false and are fundamental in fields such as psychology and philosophy. It is crucial to understand that beliefs are characterized by their truth or falsity. The relationship between a belief and its object is called reference, which determines its truthfulness. This relationship is distinct from the meaning of words, as a belief can be true or false. It is important to distinguish between believing and what one believes. While the act of believing is the same, the content of our beliefs can vary. Thus, the act of believing, what one believes, and the object of belief are key elements in our analysis. Before delving deeper into what constitutes belief, it is essential to establish preliminary requirements and examine the content of beliefs. Once this is done, we can better understand the process of believing and its implications in our intellectual life. Therefore, what one believes, like the belief itself, must be present in the mind of the believer, although it is distinct from the object of belief. For example, when I believe that Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the actual event does not occur in my mind at that moment, but there is something related to that event that is present. To this, I refer as the content of belief. The distance between the content and the object may give the impression that we cannot know anything about the external world, but I consider knowledge to be an external and complicated relationship, not a mystical one between the knower and the known. The objective reference of a belief is related to the meaning of the words or images present in its content, which determines its truthfulness. However, there are complications, such as the fact that a memory image acquires meaning through belief in memory. Moreover, it is peculiar that a single meaning generates a dual objective reference, true or false. It is time to leave behind these preliminary requirements and enter into the analysis of the content of beliefs. The content of a belief is complex and can include beliefs about specific properties of things, relationships between things, past or future events, and conditional relationships. Although the catalogue of types of beliefs is infinite, all are intrinsically complex. Language can simplify the complexity of a belief. For example, when we say that someone believes in God, they truly believe in the existence of God, a more complex idea. Similarly, when we remember something, the belief involves more than simply stating that it happened. The content of a belief involves multiple elements and their relationships. For example, asserting that Plato preceded Aristotle and that Aristotle preceded Plato are different beliefs, even though they share the same components. Beliefs can take different forms and combine words, images, and sensations. For instance, recognition involves an associated sensation and word, but we can also have perceptual judgments where the sensation evokes an image. In memories, only images of a combination of words and images may appear. More complex beliefs often consist solely of words, although they may be accompanied by unrelated images. For example, when thinking about the solar system, our beliefs often rely on images of words that sometimes blend with sensations. It is impossible for a belief to consist solely of sensations unless they have associations that give them meaning. The essence of belief lies in its difference derived from meaning. When I speak of a belief that combines sensations and words, I do not deny that words, when they are not mere images, have a sensory basis, but that they function as signs and do not have meaning by themselves. Words appear in belief as symbols due to their meaning, while sound integrates into both belief and its objective. We can focus on two cases, when the content consists exclusively of images and when it is entirely composed of words. For example, when you think of a familiar room, you may have an image of the window to the left of the door. This image-based belief becomes words when you say, "The window is to the left of the door." Although the contents are different, their objective reference is the same. The content of a belief, when expressed in words, is essentially a proposition. A proposition is a series of words that expresses a statement that can be validated or refuted. For example, all men are mortal. The words taken individually and the rules of syntax determine the meaning of a proposition, which allows us to understand new sentences. We can broaden the term proposition to include image-based contents of beliefs composed of images. In the case of remembering a room where the window is to the left of the door, the proposition will consist of the image of the window on the left, accompanied by the image of the door on the right. We can distinguish these propositions as image-based propositions and the propositions expressed in words as word-based propositions. Image-based propositions may be more primitive than word-based ones and may have existed before language. For example, most visual objects in our environment trigger tactile images. These images are part of our fundamental beliefs, even if we are not always aware of them. Expectations that influence our perceptions should be considered beliefs, even if we do not always notice them or express them in words. For instance, when a rooster repeatedly confronts its reflection in a mirror, this demonstrates an expectation that deserves to be called a belief, even though it is not expressed in words. Now let's move on to the different attitudes one can have toward a content of belief. For example, in response to the idea of an egg for breakfast, a person may anticipate it, remember it, doubt its existence, contemplate the idea, desire it, or feel aversion to it. These attitudes involve different mental and emotional states related to the same content of belief. It is important to emphasize that these attitudes are not all equal in terms of depth or importance. Some are related to desires and emotions, while others are inherently cognitive. In this discussion, we will focus on cognitive attitudes and their relationship to belief. Before diving into this perspective, we will examine two other theories that might be related to belief and may align more consistently with a behaviorist approach than with the theory we are developing. The first theory considers that the difference in belief lies in its ability to provoke a causal effect, defining the meaning of an image or word based on its causal effectiveness, that is, through its associations. We propose to define belief based on its ability to generate voluntary movements. Voluntary movements are distinguished from reflexes by involving higher nervous centers. To avoid paradoxes, we must distinguish between voluntary movements and reflexes, as asserting that both involve belief would be problematic. According to this definition, something is believed if it provokes a bodily movement. For example, we react differently to the idea of a tiger escaping depending on how it is presented. Although I do not fully support this theory, it raises interesting questions and is not easy to refute, as we could argue against it by pointing out that many beliefs do not require obvious bodily movements. However, in situations such as exams, conversations, or political speeches, our movements, like writing or speaking, reflect our beliefs. Although some beliefs do not generate immediate physical actions, they influence our behavior. For instance, thinking about Carlos's history may influence future decisions, such as avoiding similar situations. Therefore, belief cannot be defined solely by its effect on voluntary movements. We reject the perspective that considers belief as a mere action of considering an idea. Although the content of a proposition that is believed and simply considered may be authentic, its effects differ, suggesting an intrinsic difference between believing and considering. This divergence is due to an additional element in belief or consideration, according to a theoretical argument. Another point of view suggests that belief is inherent to all ideas unless something contradicts it. From this perspective, belief is not a positive phenomenon like doubt or incredulity, but an inherent reality of our ideas unless something else negates it. This approach, supported by James, suggests that it is not necessary to have a specific feeling called belief, but that the mere existence of images is sufficient. However, this viewpoint cannot explain more complex phenomena of belief, such as memory or beliefs without immediate action, as in mathematics. I argue that there are at least 3 types of belief: memory-based, expectation-based, and simple assent, each composed of specific sensations or feelings related to the believed content, such as the expectation of rain. The difference lies in the nature of the feeling of belief that accompanies the content. Personally, I cannot break down the sensations that form the feeling of belief in cases of memory, expectation, and assent. However, I do not rule out the possibility of analyzing these sensations. Furthermore, other types of belief sensations might exist, such as those related to disjunction and implication, as well as a feeling of incredulity. It is not enough for the content and the feeling of belief to coexist. It is essential that a specific relationship exists between them, expressed by saying that the content is what is believed. This is evident in the fact that we can remember one proposition while simply considering another. In summary, our analysis of assent to a proposition not expressed in words. A. There is a proposition composed of mental images and possibly sensations. B. There is the feeling of assent, which is complex and requires detailed analysis. C. There is a real relationship between assent and the proposition expressed by stating that the proposition is what is assented to. For other types of beliefs and contents, we simply adapt this analysis. If our analysis is correct, the use of words to express a belief can be misleading. Sentences may have the same verbal structure, but express psychologically different events, as in the cases of "I had lunch" and "Caesar conquered Gaul." This problem also applies to the difference between expectation and assent to a proposition about the future. The vision of belief that I have defended is not new, except for the distinction between the 2 types of belief feelings. According to James, belief is a type of feeling close to emotions. Moreover, he points out that alcohol and nitrous oxide can intensify the feeling of belief, leading to the search for content to connect it. However, this is merely speculation on which I do not wish to insist too much. Lecture 13. Truth and Falsehood. The main topic of our discussion is the difference between true and false, which is not the same as talking about the mind from a psychological standpoint. Beliefs vary in certainty, but there is no psychological way to distinguish the true from the false. Truth and falsehood are tied to facts that transcend our experiences, except in relation to our minds. Ultimately, they depend on how they relate to external elements, We want to believe that our beliefs can generate knowledge, which requires that they be true. Thus, our minds can generate knowledge, and this question is crucial. Any analysis of the mind must take this into account. Ignoring it would be like describing a clock without mentioning its accuracy, or a thermometer without discussing its function of measuring temperature. There are many challenges surrounding knowledge, defining it, knowing if we possess it, and how we can know it. I will divide the discussion into 4 parts. First, from a behavioral perspective, knowledge is reflected in how we react to our environment. Second, true beliefs have characteristics that differentiate them from false ones, but there are no solid reasons to substantiate this. Third, the problem of verifiability. Are there circumstances that justify the certainty of a belief? Fourth, defining truth and falsehood and how they relate to the words we use. Let's imagine a scenario where we ask a child, "What is double 2?" and they respond 4. This suggests that the child understands the question. However, if we then ask them what double 3, 4, or 5 is, and they consistently answer 4, this indicates that they do not actually grasp the concept. This also applies to scientific instruments. For example, a weather vane that always points northeast may seem accurate, but if it changes direction on a hot day, it is not reliable. A good instrument or a knowledgeable person will provide different answers depending on whether the relevant stimuli change. This is essential for defining the accuracy of a response. Another child may answer correctly at first, but then give random answers. This demonstrates a lack of consistent understanding. In both cases, it shows the necessity for accurate responses in relevant situations. Accuracy is defined by A. Differentiating responses to relevant stimuli, B. Maintaining the same response to similar stimuli. The nature of the stimulus determines what is relevant. For example, for a weather vane, the direction of movement matters, not its strength. For the child, the meaning of words matters, not who is asking the question. Knowledge is not limited to precise answers. It can include perception. For example, a small bird avoids branches while flying. This knowledge relies on visual perception. In more advanced forms of knowledge, the response may differ from the stimulus. For example, a calendar indicates future events. Habits are formed by past events and activated by present situations. Reacting to something falling on your foot is a habit developed over time. Most knowledge functions like a habit, for example, automatically responding with a date of birth. The theory of self-evidence suggests that some beliefs are undeniable, such as 2 + 2 = 4, or that two objects cannot occupy the same place at the same time. For these theories to be valid, the self-evident belief must be distinct and consistent with one another. However, self-evidence does not guarantee absolute truth, as beliefs can be questioned. Furthermore, believing that a belief is self-evident can lead to errors. Self-evident beliefs may be subject to doubts. For instance, the belief in self-evidence at the Antipodes might have been mistaken for our ancestors. Mayon argues that some beliefs are wrongly considered self-evident, but this does not eliminate the risk of error. Logical beliefs, like 2 + 2 = 4, are based on definitions and are under our control. Logical impossibilities, such as one thing cannot be in two places at the same time, derive from definitions and are not physical laws. Self-evidence requires that certain beliefs be indisputable, but the vague nature of words and the risk of error pose problems. Inconsistency suggests that a set of beliefs is internally coherent, but that does not guarantee their correspondence with reality. Both criteria have limitations, as truth is complex and remains a subject of debate. The coherence theory, in particular, lacks evidence to support the idea that a coherent set of beliefs is true. Therefore, truth cannot be infallibly defined by self-evidence or coherence, and the search for criteria of truth remains a challenge in philosophy. The formal formulation of the truth or falsehood of a belief begins by considering how we derive the objective reference of a proposition from the meanings of the words that compose it. The objective reference of a proposition is conceived as a function of the meanings of the words that comprise it, but it differs from the meaning of a word due to the inherent duality of truth and falsehood. For example, the proposition "today is Tuesday" can be believed, whether it is true or false. The objective reference of a belief is not determined solely by a fact in itself, but also by the direction in which the belief points, whether towards the goal in the case of a true proposition, or away from it in the case of a false one. To avoid problems in determining the objective reference of a proposition without knowing its truth or falsehood, it is useful to talk about the meaning of a proposition as its capacity to point to the fact that would make it true or away from the fact that would make it false. In this way, we know the meaning of a proposition when we understand what circumstances would make it true and what circumstances would make it false, even if we do not know its current state of truth. The foundation of the meaning of a proposition derives from the meanings of the words that compose it, and propositions generally present themselves in pairs, distinguished by the presence and absence of the word not. These two propositions have the same goal, but their meanings are oppositional. When one is true, the other is false, and vice versa. The purely formal definition of truth and falsehood seeks to express that a proposition is true when it points to its goal, and false when it diverges from it. In simple cases, this can be understood as a correspondence between the proposition and its goal, similar to the relationship between a memory image and the object it represents. However, in most cases, this relationship is not so straightforward, necessitating a deeper exploration of the complexity behind this formal correspondence. The link between propositions and their goals becomes more complex when we deal with propositions involving relationships between terms, especially when those relationships are represented by words rather than by direct images. For example, the proposition Socrates precedes Plato implies a relationship between the two names, but this relationship is not a word in itself, complicating the determination of the proposition's goal. Asterisk, asterisk. When dealing with negative propositions like Plato does not precede Socrates, the complexity increases. Negative propositions cannot be expressed negatively in language, which means they represent positive facts related to the negation of other positive facts. In summary, there are three classes of dualities concerning facts: A. Image propositions, and B. Verbal propositions. C. Positive and negative facts. Image propositions are intrinsically positive but can be believed or not, while verbal propositions are always positive facts but can be verified by a positive or negative objective. The correspondence between belief and its objective becomes more complex, with propositions involving relationships between terms. Even in simple cases, such as comparing the brightness of the sun to that of the moon, establishing the direct correspondence between images can be challenging. Although the formal theory provides a framework for determining the truth or falsehood of a proposition, it is insufficient to explain why we tend to favor true beliefs over false ones. The preference for true beliefs can be better understood by considering the causal capacity of beliefs and the congruence of responses that arise from truthful beliefs. However, this also depends on the purpose, which makes purpose an essential element in the theory of knowledge. Lecture 14, Emotions and Will. Regarding the two themes addressed in this lecture, I have no original contributions, and I simply treat them to complement the discussion of my main thesis, which is that all mental phenomena arise exclusively from sensations and images. Traditionally, psychologists have viewed emotions as a separate category of mental events. Nevertheless, I do not attempt to deny the evident need to conduct specific research on emotions due to their unique characteristics. My interest lies in analyzing emotions. It is evident that an emotion is intrinsically complex, and we must ask ourselves whether it ever contains non-physiological elements that cannot be reduced to sensations and images, as well as their interactions. Although we mainly focus on analyzing emotions, we realize that the most crucial aspect is the physiological cause of emotions. This subject has been the focus of valuable and extremely interesting work. While the pure analysis of emotions has made limited progress, given that we have defined perceptions, sensations, and images based on their physiological causality, it becomes clear that our problem of analyzing emotions is closely tied to their physiological cause. Modern perspectives on the causality of emotions find their origin in what is known as the James Lange theory. James represents this perspective as follows: our natural tendency is to think that the most intense emotions, such as sadness, fear, anger, or love, are triggered by a mental perception of an event that excites the mental affect known as emotion, and that this latter mental state leads to physical expressions. My theory, on the other hand, asserts that physical changes occur immediately after the perception of the stimulus, and that our perception of these changes forms the emotion. Emphasis on the physical changes that occur immediately after the perception of the stimulus. Common sense tells us that when we lose a fortune, we feel sadness and cry. When we encounter a bear, we feel fear and run away. When we are insulted by a rival, we become angry and react. The hypothesis I defend here holds that this order of sequence is incorrect, that a mental state is not immediately induced by another, and that physical manifestations must precede it. Thus, it is most logical to say that we feel sadness because we cry, anger because we react aggressively, and fear because we tremble, rather than crying, reacting aggressively, or trembling because we feel sadness, anger, or fear, depending on the case. Without the physical states that follow perception, the latter would remain purely cognitive, devoid of emotionality and warmth. Around this hypothesis, a vast literature has emerged. The history of how this theory has overcome previous criticisms and its challenges against the modern experimental work of Sherrington and Cannon has been well documented by James R. Angel in an article titled "A Reconsideration of James's Emotion Theory in Light of Recent Critiques." This article by Angel defends both James's theory and mine. Although I speak cautiously on a subject in which I have little experience, it seems to me that his defense is generally accurate. Sherrington, through experiments with dogs, demonstrated that many typical signs of emotions were present in their behavior, even when, by sectioning the spinal cord in the lower cervical region, the viscera remained isolated from any communication with the brain, except through certain cranial nerves. He lists the various signs that contributed to indicating the existence of an emotion, as vivid as that which the animal had shown us before the spinal operation. From this, he deduces that the physiological condition of the viscera cannot be the cause of the emotion manifested under such circumstances, and concludes that we are compelled to consider the possibility that the visceral expression of emotion is secondary to the cerebral action that occurs with the mental state. We can agree, along with James, that visceral and organic sensations, as well as related memories and associations, contribute to primitive emotion, but we must consider them as reinforcing factors rather than triggers of psychosis. Angel suggests that the manifestation of emotions in such cases might be due to past experiences generating habits that would only require the stimulation of brain reflexes. Nevertheless, in his view, anger and certain forms of fear may express themselves without the intervention of the brain. Anger and fear have been particularly examined by Cannon, whose work is of great importance. His findings are found in his book, Body Changes in Pain, Hunger, Fear, and Anger. The most remarkable part of Cannon's book focuses on the study of the effects caused by the secretion of adrenaline. Adrenaline is a substance secreted into the blood by the adrenal glands, which are ductless glands whose functions, both in physiology and in relation to emotions, have only been understood in recent years. Cannon discovered that pain, fear, and anger were triggered in circumstances that affected adrenaline levels, and that an artificial injection of adrenaline could, for example, generate all the symptoms of fear. He studied the effects of adrenaline in different parts of the body and found that it dilated the pupils, raised the hairs, constricted blood vessels, among other effects. These effects continued to manifest even when the parts of the body were separated from the body and artificially kept alive. Cannon's main argument against James's theory, if understood correctly, is based on the fact that similar conditions in the viscera can accompany different emotions, particularly fear and anger. Several types of emotions can make us cry, so it would not be correct to claim, as James does, that we feel sadness because we cry, since sometimes we cry when we feel happy. However, this argument is not conclusive against James, as one cannot prove that there were no visceral differences for different emotions, and in fact, it is unlikely to be the case. As Angel points out, both fear and joy can provoke heart palpitations, but in one case we find high muscle tone, while in the other there is relaxation and a general feeling of weakness. Angel's conclusion, after analyzing the experiments of Sherrington and Cannon, is therefore that he would assert that, concerning the critiques suggested by these two psychologists, James's fundamental arguments are not substantially affected. If I saw the need to take sides in this debate, I would agree with this conclusion. However, I believe that my thesis on the analysis of emotions can manifest without needing to arrive at a premature conclusion about the controversial aspects of the physiological problem. According to our definitions, if James is correct, we could consider that an emotion involves a confused perception of the viscera involved in its origin, whereas if Cannon and Sherrington are correct, an emotion involves a confused perception of its external stimulus. This follows from what was presented in Lecture 7. In that lecture, we defined perception as the appearance, however irregular, of one or more external objects to the brain. For it to be an appearance of one or more objects, it is sufficient that it is connected to them by a continuous chain and that it varies when they vary sufficiently. Therefore, the question of whether a mental event can be considered a perception depends on our ability to infer something about its external causes. If such an inference is possible, then the event in question will fit into our definition of perception. In this case, according to the definition from Lesson 00, its non-mnemonic elements will be sensations. Thus, whether emotions are caused by changes in the viscera or by sensory objects, they contain elements that are sensations. According to our definition, an emotion as a whole is undoubtedly much more complex than a mere perception. Essentially, an emotion is a process in which what we might consider a cross-section of the emotion becomes a perception. According to James, this perception may be related to a bodily condition, while his opponents argue that in some cases it is related to an external object. An emotion as a whole contains dynamic elements like motor impulses, desires, pleasures, and pains. According to the theory we adopted in Lesson 3, desires, pleasures, and pains are characteristics of processes and not separate components. An emotion like anger, for example, is a specific type of process that consists of perceptions and bodily movements in general. The desires, pleasures, and pains involved are inherent properties of this process and not independent elements of the emotion. From our perspective, the dynamic elements of an emotion contain ingredients beyond what is found in the processes we analyzed in Lesson 3. The components of an emotion are simply sensations, images, and bodily movements that follow a specific pattern. With this conclusion, we can set aside emotions and consider will. When we approach the topic of will, the first thing we must define is voluntary movement. We have already defined vital movements and have argued that, from a behavioral standpoint, it is difficult to distinguish which of these movements are reflexes and which are voluntary. Nevertheless, there is a clear distinction. For example, when we decide to get up in the morning, the movement we make is clearly voluntary, while the heartbeat is involuntary. We cannot directly control it by our will except indirectly, through medication. Breathing falls at an intermediate point. Normally we breathe automatically without the intervention of will, but we can modify or stop it if we wish. James, in his work Psychology, chapter 26, argues that the distinctive characteristic of a voluntary act is that it involves an idea of the movement that is to be performed, which forms from memory images of the sensations experienced when that same movement was performed in the past. He asserts that, from this perspective, no movement can be considered voluntary unless it has previously occurred involuntarily. I see no reason to question the validity of this viewpoint. Therefore, we can assert that movements accompanied by synesthetic sensations tend to be caused by the images of those sensations, and when caused in this manner, they are considered voluntary. Abolition, in an emphatic sense, goes beyond mere voluntary movement. The type of situation I refer to is the decision made after a process of deliberation. Voluntary movements are part of this, but they do not constitute the entirety. In addition to movements, a judgment is present, that is, the internal assertion, "This is what I will do." We also experience a sensation of tension during the phase of doubt, followed by a different sensation at the moment of decision. There seems to be no reason to assume that a completely new ingredient is necessary in this process. Sensations and images, with their relationships and causal laws, provide everything needed to analyze will, just as the fact that synesthetic images tend to give rise to the movements with which they are linked. The conflict of desires is essential in the causation of this emphatic type of will. For a time, we may experience synesthetic images of incompatible movements, followed by the exclusive image of the movement we wish to perform. Therefore, it seems that will adds no new and irreparable element to that of the mind. Lecture 15. Characteristics of mental phenomena. At the end of this journey, the initial question arises again. What is the difference between mind and matter, or how does psychology differ from physics? Initially, it was suggested that the difference lies in causal laws, rather than in the matter itself. We have argued that there is a matter, images, governed exclusively by psychological laws. However, defining images has proven difficult, as they do not seem to have a universal distinguishing characteristic. In this final lecture, we will review several methods to distinguish between mind and matter. Then, we will outline true metaphysics, where mind and matter are constructed from a neutral substance with causal laws as the foundation. We will begin by defining mental phenomena using the concept of consciousness, which is essential to the mind. Henry Hett distinguished between sensations and physiological events, asserting that sensation requires consciousness. Although this claim is debatable, consciousness implies being aware of something. I propose to define it in terms of the relationship between a mental image and an object. This must be modified by considering the consciousness of perceptual objects, as it involves expectations of future sensations. All these expectations must be true to avoid ambiguities. The question arises whether we can be aware of images according to our definition. This would imply images of images, which seems unlikely. We can approach this in two ways: by denying the science of images, or by considering that an image can mean another image of the same prototype through different associations. The first option has already been discussed, and we concluded that there must be, in one way or another, a consciousness of images. Therefore, we choose the second path. According to this hypothesis, there may be two images of the same prototype, so that one signifies the other, rather than signifying the prototype. The associations of an image may differ from those of the prototype, allowing it to signify another image rather than the original object. This enables us to become aware of images without requiring new mental structures, just new associations. Regarding the consciousness of absent objects, this is achieved through association and habit. Sensations in themselves are not cases of consciousness, but they are related to it through memory and correlations that transform sensations into perceptions. Consciousness is too complex to be considered the fundamental characteristic of the mind. Both belief and images play a role. Images can be defined in terms of causality, but the difference between physical and psychological causal laws must be taken into account. The discussion on the characteristics of mental phenomena leads us to consider causal unity in the acquisition of experience in both humans and animals. The cause of behavior is not limited to a single event at a given moment, but involves several events at different times. For example, a child's reaction to fire does not depend solely on its proximity, but also on prior experience of a burn. This suggests that mind and causality are not closely linked and can explain many features that seem essentially mental. The possibility that mental phenomena have neural bases is relevant. The acquisition of experience, memory, and other mental characteristics can be explained in terms of brain activity and neural plasticity. This raises the need to find a more solid foundation to define the mind beyond mere consciousness or causality. Subjectivity comes closer to what we need to define the mind. It refers to the experience and awareness from the perspective of the one experiencing them. This distinguishes mental experience from pure physical causality. Although its precise definition is difficult, subjectivity may be fundamental to the mind and cannot be completely reduced to physical explanations. Subjectivity is related to how mental phenomena represent the world from a particular viewpoint, whether in the form of perspectives or biographies. This characteristic distinguishes mental phenomena from purely physical phenomena, as it involves a unique internal experience. Regarding the definition of data, this term refers to observations or information gathered through perception or measurement. This is fundamental for scientific research, both in psychology and physics. Data contribute to the understanding of reality, although their interpretation may vary depending on the discipline. The connection between the epistemological definition of data and the psychological analysis of knowledge presents challenges. Data are linked to beliefs and phenomena, which implies that neither is theoretically indisputable and that both have a degree of vagueness. Due to memory and the significance of images, data are largely formed throughout our lives, some by inference and others more directly. At an advanced stage of science, data are perceived as foundations for other parts of science, based solely on observation. At this stage, an observer trained with analytical attention perceives them and considers them sophisticated and elaborate, although their logical status differs from theories demonstrated by other means in scientific disciplines outside of psychology. Data primarily refer to perception, where the essence of sensation is considered a fundamental datum. In physics, the existence of an ideal observer capable of isolating sensation as a fundamental datum is postulated. Therefore, in essence, data in the physical sciences are sensations. Applying this perspective to physiology, nerves and the brain are not truly data in the ideal structure of science. They are replaced by sensations through which the physiologist perceives them. In summary, all sensations are data in psychology, and therefore they are also data in the physical sciences. The fundamental data in psychology consist of sensations, images, and their relationships, constructing beliefs, desires, and other complex mental phenomena. Thus, the distinction between physical and psychological data diminishes, raising the question of whether causal laws in psychology differ from those in any other science or are of a physiological nature. To address this question, we must first differentiate between approximate laws and precise laws. Physics, as an empirical science, deals with the particulars of the same type as the sensations addressed by psychology. The causal laws in physics link particulars within the same material entity, while psychology groups them under the same perspective. Images, lacking an active place, remain exclusively within the domain of psychology. The fundamental difference between physics and psychology lies in how phenomena are grouped. In physics, nerves and the brain constitute matter, while in psychology, they are our sensations. When observing a fragment of matter, sensations, as part of the system of irregular appearances of matter, share a causal dependence similar to that of instantaneous appearances. Therefore, our sensations are subject to the causal influence of physical laws. The crucial question is the causality of mental images. These images are subject to causality that can be reduced to conventional physical causality within the nervous tissue. This leads us to materialism, which suggests that all mental phenomena causally depend on physical phenomena. However, the answer to this question remains uncertain. In examining causal laws in psychology, it is crucial to distinguish between approximate generalizations and precise laws. Approximate generalizations include phenomena such as habit and association, where association can operate in both directions depending on the type of memory. However, these laws are statistical trends and do not accurately predict what will occur in a specific situation at a given moment. The advance from the law of habit toward more precise explanations seems to direct us toward the nervous system. When an experience is repeated, the brain gradually changes, creating easier pathways for nerve currents. If we understand this deeply, we could replace habits with precise descriptions of how experiences modify our behavior. These concepts push students in physiology toward materialistic approaches in their research. Although there are exceptions, such as Professor J.S. Haldane, the question of whether psychological causes can explain concrete events is a subject of ongoing research. While we attempt to clarify this, I do not think we can provide a definitive answer at this time. However, based on my theory, I believe that an ultimate scientific explanation would resemble psychology more than physics. It would be a unified narrative stripped of metaphysical fictions. A fundamental unifying science would simplify the understanding of mental events and make psychology appear less isolated. Our conclusions can be summarized as follows. Both physics and psychology deal with logical constructions, grouping particulars in different ways. Psychological causal laws include subjectivity and causality, which are interconnected. Habit, memory, and thought are developments of causality that are likely linked to physical activity in the nervous system. Consciousness varies in complexity, and both physics and psychology are subject to psychological causal laws, although psychology comes closer to reality.